So when I turned 18, they had to release me. I moved in with my best friend, and we sold drugs, we used drugs. And on January 21st, 1998, we had someone come into the house and hold us up at gunpoint. And they held a gun to my best friend's girlfriend, and they proceeded to beat up my best friend. And we were all forced to sit there and watch. And after they left and that event happened, he just decided like he was going to get messed up. And I remember him looking at me and saying to me, he was like, dude, stay up with me, let's party, let's do this. And I was like, dude, I'm just tired, it's been a long night, I'm just going to go to bed. And it was, so January 21st, 1998, it was probably like 3 a.m. and my door just gets blown open, and a buddy of mine runs in and goes, hey, Jerry just shot himself. And so I remember sitting up and looking at him going, dude, what are you talking about? He just shot himself. And he said, Jerry just shot himself. So I jumped up, and I still to this day remember it. And I went down the stairs, came around the corner to the living room, and there was my best friend, but basically a brother of mine, since I was just a young kid, was sitting on a couch, and his head was tilted back, gun still in his hand, and he was making probably some of the worst noises I've ever seen and or heard. And I asked the kids that were there, I said, did you guys call an ambulance? And their exact words were, no, we didn't, we both have warrants. And I said, call an effing ambulance. And they went out to the kitchen, and I remember my best friend was sitting there, and I call him my brother because he was basically my brother. And I remember him making a lot of noises and watching my mother go through all this medical stuff growing up. Like while she was going to school as a paramedic, um, she would teach the classes to become a paramedic. So I would get paid like $75 every Saturday to go pretend like I was hit by a car. And my mom would be like, oh, your right arm's broken and you have right side pain. So the guys would come up and they'd be like, what happened? I'd be like, oh, I crossed the crosswalk. And then they'd like touch my right side, and I'd be like, oh, and I'd like moan in pain, but I got paid for it. So I knew a little bit about medical, and I could tell that he couldn't breathe. And I took him off the chair, and I was holding him in my arms. And, still to this day, I can't say how long that it was, but it felt like it was eternity. And the two kids that were supposed to go call 911, they didn't come back. So I laid Jerry down. I went out to the kitchen, and they were gone. And I ended up by calling 911. Dispatcher answered, and I said, there's a gunshot wound, suicide, gunshot wound to the head at 138 Oxford Street, Portland, Maine. And I remember, I remember the ambulance pulling up, and as soon as I walked out the door, I literally locked eyes with my mother. Was the first person. My mother was working that night, and she was in tears because she just got a young male gunshot wound to the head at my address. And I remember once she noticed that that I was okay, she immediately went in, did her job, and detective showed up. And I remember sitting in the kitchen, and the detective literally looked at me and said, why did you shoot Jerry? And I lost it. Like I came up over the table at the guy, and right about that same time, his mother walked in and said he wasn't going to make it. And because they had already transported him to the hospital, he was on life support. And I ended up by going to the hospital, and I was there with his family, and everyone was going in to say their goodbyes, and I couldn't go in. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because the people that were coming out and who were talking about how he looked. He was swollen, his brain was swollen, and I couldn't go in because I felt like the way that I saw him was the worst possible way that I could see someone. So I didn't want to go in and see him that way. And that just spiraled my addiction because I just tried to mask every emotion that I had at that point. I mean, I was literally, um, me and his brother were literally down in fists of Ice 101 and 151 and deliberately going to the strip to start fights. And we were picking fights at bars, clubs, and I broke my hand and it just was like spiraling. And even though I was spiraling, I just didn't want to feel. Um, and it was probably about 5.5 months after that, I ended up by getting locked up for, I think it was an assault, and I was sitting in county jail, and I was starting to, I was sober, I wasn't on the pills, I felt good, and I got called out of the pod into the sergeant's office by the chaplain. And they're like, "You have a phone call." And I answer the phone, and it's my mother who told me that my older brother just was shot 5 times.
Oh my.
And he was shot 5 times, point blank, with an AK-47, an assault rifle. Um, and she said that he was in intensive care and that that she would keep me posted. So I'm literally locked up, and it was the next day, and I made a call to a friend, and I kind of got the story of what happened. Was I was locked up, and a group of guys beat up a girl. My brother and his friends went to this house party to go take care of these guys who beat up this girl, and they pulled out a gun, and a big shooting happened. And so I'm sitting county, and next thing you know, the jail door pops open, and I found out through that phone call who shot my brother. And that jail door opened, and it was the kid who shot my brother. And I remember just pacing all that night, going, as soon as that door opens, like it's on. Like I'm, because at that point I didn't know what was going on with my brother. And he came right up to my window, and I was locked in my cell because they had split tier lockdown. So the second floor wasn't out if the first floor was out, and vice versa. So if the second floor was out, first floor was in. If the first floor was out, second floor was in. And he came right up to my window, and he looked right at me and goes, "Hey, how's your brother doing?" And I just remember looking at him going, "Dude, as soon as they pop this door open," because at breakfast time we all ate together. As soon as they pop this door open, um, it's on. And I stayed up all that night. And first thing in the morning, I come out of chow, and he had told the guards that he couldn't be in that pod with him. So he ended up by getting shipped to protective custody. I was in there. I think I was doing 9 months. I think that time I have almost 10 years being locked up. I'm 41 years old. I've probably done about 10 years being locked up. And I remember it was like 6 months after my brother was shot. He survived. He ended up by losing most of his right leg, and they had to take the muscle from his thigh and his calf from his left leg and attach it over to his right leg. And he still struggles. He's had like circulation issues and whatnot. And here it was. I ended up by getting out. I'm on probation, and I ended up by going out and immediately using. Like after I had been clean for so long, but I had. It wasn't like I was working any type of program. I wasn't like really digging my roots in, trying to find purpose. Like it was like they opened the door, and I just went out running. And then immediately, they say that we never start over. We all, and that is exactly what happened. Like I picked up exactly where I had left off, which was being an addict, selling drugs, being a punk, picking fights. And it was and I just kept violating probation over and over and over and over. But I wouldn't violate for new charges. I'd violate for dirty urine. I'd go in, do 4 months, get out, stay out a couple months, fail another drug test, go back in for 6 months. And one of the craziest things about it was like that insanity and the repetition of like knowing how that circle would always end up, but not not finding the way to stop that cycle. Like to me, it was normal. And then there was a point where again I didn't go to probation because I knew I was going to fail a drug test. I was wanted, and I think it was 1999 New Year's Eve. I had my door kicked open by the search warrant squad. I had my oldest daughter, who's now 21, sleeping beside me. She was like 2 or 3, and they arrested me. And I remember saying to him, I was like, "Can I at least say goodbye to my daughter?" And he just laughed at me and proceeded to say that I was going to be the first person that he locked up in 2000 or 2001, because it was New Year's Eve and it was like 11:30. Like by the time he was gonna book me, like I was gonna be, I was like the New Year's baby, like. And I remember going to the county jail again. All of them knew my name. Like I was this revolving door. And I remember talking to a guy. He was older than me. He had done a bunch of time in prison, and he was going back up to prison to do a couple of years. And he's like, "Travis, like probation just isn't working for you." He was like, "Just come up and do your time." And I was like, "No, no, I really think that I'm going to do it this time. I'm really going to do it this time." Literally his words to me the last time I spoke to him was like, "All right, Travis, I'm going to leave the light on for you." And I was like, "Okay." I got let out on what's called main pretrial. That they let me out, and I was on these stipulations and conditions, and I violated it the first night. And they came in, kicked my door in again. I was staying at a hotel with a girl. They kicked my door in, and I jumped off the balcony, and I was tackled out in the parking lot, and they brought me to jail. And here I am sitting there going, at that point in time, it was like I wasn't seeing my youngest daughter, and the drug use has gone from sniffing to IV, and I was just like, something's got to change. And I ended up by going in front of the judge, and I'm sitting there in the pumpkin patch with all the other guys sitting there in their orange jumpsuits, and I'm sitting there in the pumpkin patch, and everyone's getting their sentences, and the judge is like, "All right, we'll give you 90 days, get out, continue probation." And I remember sitting there and I looked at the judge and I said, "How much time do I have hanging?" And they said, "4 years." And I looked right at the judge and I said, "I'll take it." And the judge was like, "You're going to take 4 years over 90 days. And I was like, "Yes, yes." Like that was my moment where I just didn't want to do it anymore. Like I at that point, I just felt so broken, felt useless, felt didn't have a single ounce of hope in me. And they were like, "Okay." They said, "Well, we'll give you 3." So because I was going to do all my time, they said, "We'll give you 3 years." And I was like, "All right." So I go back to county, and it's starting to sink in, like, okay, I'm going away for a while. And I was like, "But that's okay. Like I need it. Like I was dying." And so I ended up by going up to the main state prison, and I go in, and the first things they do is they make you give your socks to the guards, and they put them in a bag. So if you ever escape, the dogs can sniff you out and track you. And I was like, "All right." So I go into the pods, and soon as I walked through that door, 2 things happened. The first thing I heard was, "I told you I was going to leave the light on for you." That was the first thing I heard when I walked through that door, was like, "Hey, yo, Travis, I told you I'd leave the light on for you." And it was funny, but at the same point, it was like, geez, like here's this cycle. And I stayed away from all of the prison, the politics, the gangs, the drugs. Like I really worked on myself. And that's when I first found a program of recovery. And there's so many programs like of recovery that are out there that work, that are based on individuals. Like there's no right way. But I found something that worked for me.